Nintendo has some dark secrets they don't want you to know. The same company that slaps Mario, Kirby, and Pikachu on literally anything they can, and I mean anything, has some stuff to answer for. Some of their biggest games of all time may have actually been completely stolen, with allegations dating all the way back to the first big hit they had in the 1980s, which might explain why it could still be going on today. In 2019, programmer and YouTuber Infernal Plus posted a video showing his new creation, Mario Royale. This game allowed for up to 75 people to play a single level of Super Mario Bros. At the same time. It was crazy, innovative chaos. A great game for thousands of fans to enjoy, until Nintendo took it down. It was a sad day for fans. I mean, at least we still had the new Fire Emblem to look forward to. Right, guys? This short but fun-filled ride would be forever gone. Huh. Just over a year later, Nintendo would release Super Mario Bros. 35 as a part of celebrating, well, Mario turning 35. Now about that Peach relationship, similarly to what they did with Tetris 99, which still has me addicted by the way, you've got 35 Marios racing towards the goal, and while it's not as blunt as the fan version, there's certainly a lot of ways to mess with your competition here. And while Nintendo would take this down eventually as well, the similarities were uncanny. A fan-made Mario Battle Royale gets taken down and all of a sudden a year later, Nintendo comes out with their own? Allegations would surface of Nintendo stealing that idea. I mean, this game couldn't have been that time intensive to create. Kind of a theme for that year, huh? So it's not like the time argument holds that much weight. This could have realistically been a response to the fan game's popularity. But this blatant finessing of an idea from Nintendo, if they were indeed guilty of it, wouldn't even matter. It was the perfect crime. Nintendo was in the full legal right to take the game down. It was infringing on their intellectual property. They had the original available on the online service, so they were still technically selling it. After taking it down, it ceased to exist in their eyes. It was never supposed to be made in the first place. Mario is their creation, not the fans, and there was nothing that could be done. Well, except make a fan game in response to the takedown called DMCA Royale, which was pretty funny. The thing about this though, right, is why this fan game specifically? Yeah, Nintendo has a reputation of takedowns, but there's definitely a lot of fan games that don't worry too much about getting DMCA'd. Looking at you, Waluigi's taco stand, makes you wonder and gives further credence to the conspiracy. But come on, it can't be that likely. It's not like Nintendo's done it before. Oh. AM2R, another Metroid 2 remake, is kinda like the shining light at the end of a dark tunnel for Nintendo to many fans. You see, Metroid as a series had gone through a little something called Nobody Wants to Play It syndrome at the time, where 3 of the most heavily praised games in the history of the internet failed to sell as much combined as Link's crossbow training for the Wii. Didn't help that we had other M, oh god. But it's okay, as is the echo chamber of social media where the popular accounts get their messages spread abroad, the passionate fanbase of the Metroid games would try, and I mean really try, to get some attention on these games. So much so that it actually seemed to work. Many people who you know have never actually played an entry in the series now acting like they've been starving for one for so long. I don't know if this or the Persona fanbase was worse with this type of thing. I kid, of course, I love you Metroid fans, you'll always be in my heart parasocially, but the point is Nintendo heard the message. Or maybe not. Regardless, a passionate fan named Dr. M64 certainly did when he released another Metroid 2 remake. Which, well yeah, it had a very descriptive title, I gotta give it to him. The project was beloved by fans, the video essays coming left and right. It clearly had a ton of love and effort put into it. And Nintendo took it down. Only to reveal this game just a year later. You've gotta be kidding me. So Nintendo takes down Mario Royale and releases their own a year later. Then this Metroid 2 remake, which was publicly in development for many years, receiving a lot of hype along the way, finally comes out, and what do you know, Nintendo suddenly comes up with this as an idea to appeal to the growing community supporting the series online. Call me a tinfoil hat, whatever you want, I'm just pointing out that this type of thing has happened not just once, but multiple times. Makes you wonder, when 3D Mario Maker was released as a mod for Super Mario 64 and stayed up for 3 years before only recently receiving a takedown, what does Nintendo have cooking for the future? Is this a hint? But okay, I get it. These allegations of stealing don't need to be real. Mario 35 was likely a response to the boom in popularity of Battle Royale games around this time, with Fortnite's addictiveness being compared to heroin. What? Nintendo probably saw this and was like, yeah, I bet we could get Mario to do that too. Samus Returns was likely in development for many years due to a whole new graphical engine needing to be made for it. The takedown of AM2R was undoubtedly related to it, but the allegations that Nintendo stole the idea are pretty ridiculous. 3D Mario Maker? Well, I guess we gotta wait and see on that one, huh? This all makes Nintendo look really bad. Guilty of taking down fan competitors of their new releases, but not guilty of stealing an idea, let alone an entire game. Mario 64 is their classic to own and nothing to worry about. Man, I really need to watch what I say here, huh? While being without question one of the most innovative and important video games in history, throughout the industry it's pretty agreed upon that Mario 64 wouldn't have been possible without the advancements in 3D game technology created by Studio Argonaut Games, who made the Super FX chip that allowed games like Star Fox to run on the limited power of the Super Nintendo. Shame it didn't work out too well for Star Fox, huh? And while to many this is the last major contribution to the industry by Argonaut, according to a 2013 interview with the studio's founder Jez San, they had even bigger plans for 3D gaming technology, allegedly pitching an idea for the world's first 3D platformer to Nintendo. Yeah. We pitched to do a 3D platform game, he said, the likes of which had never been done before. We mocked up a prototype using Yoshi. It was essentially the world's first 3D platform game and was obviously a big risk. This was huge info, and you'd think Nintendo would be all over it, right? Pushing the industry forward even further and with one of their most popular characters to boot. But in a seemingly shocking twist of events, Nintendo rejected the pitch. It was said that Nintendo, quote, didn't want an outside company using their characters. Remember that for later. And the Yoshi game was apparently turned into Croc Legend of Gabos, which came out on like every non-Nintendo console at the time. It actually turned out to be the studio's best-selling game that had their own characters in it as well. So all is good, right? Well, maybe not. The big launch title of the Nintendo 64 would, quite interestingly, be a 3D platformer, featuring a Mario character. Huh. And if you think it was just a coincidence that Nintendo would move Mario into the third dimension here, then series creator Shigeru Miyamoto may have something to say about that. According to San, Miyamoto met up with the team after Mario 64 released and thanked them for the idea to do a 3D platforming game, apologizing for not accepting the Yoshi idea earlier. What? Yeah, this is real, I'm not joking. The audacity to thank him after rejecting the pitch and Nintendo coming up with one of the most successful games of all time, the most widely speedrun game ever, wasn't even something that Nintendo came up with. The idea of a 3D platforming Yoshi game was rejected so Nintendo could create a first-party Mario game of their own. This is a crazy and insane revelation, if it's true. This is still an allegation. Nothing was completely proven. There's no actual evidence. Well, that would be the case. It's just, files related to Yoshi can actually be found within Croc. Yeah. Not only do the characters look similar, but there's a possible glitch in the game that allows the player to hover in the air after jumping. And I wonder where we've seen that before. This definitely helps the argument, with the only real evidence against it being some former developers who claim that Croc was supposed to be a Yoshi racing game, not a 3D platformer, which is a pretty big difference. So while it's not entirely clear of how much of the Croc prototype inspired Super Mario 64, what we do know is Nintendo and Argonaut's relationship has certainly soured a lot since then, with no new Nintendo exclusive games ever being released until they eventually folded in 2004. Guess you could say before this Yoshi thing, Nintendo and Argonaut were partners in time. Ha! Oh wow, that looked a lot better on the script. Nintendo may have stolen the idea behind Super Mario 64, and would allegedly go on to do similar practices in the future. Big, but it is an idea. Now I know society's built on ideas, like if nobody came up with the wheel, light bulb, or Senran Kagura, life as we know it wouldn't exist. But what's even worse is not just taking the idea, but taking everything. Stealing a game and selling it as your own. A game that, like those other inventions' importance to society, without it, Nintendo as we know it likely wouldn't exist. Without it, we wouldn't have seen the NES, the DS, the Wii U, or the Switch. And before we get into what's likely the biggest and most controversial allegation in Nintendo history, I want to touch on the Switch for a minute. I gotta say, those first couple of years were critical to its success, and innovative games like Breath of the Wild, Odyssey, and Octopath really made a big difference. But funny thing about Octopath, did you know that it actually has a prequel? This video is sponsored by Square Enix and Octopath Traveler Champions of the Continent. Yeah, this is a real thing. From Team Asano, the prequel to this critically acclaimed RPG series arrives to iOS and Android devices. A new story unfolds in the world of Ostera, where the chosen ones must rise up against the great evils of wealth, power, and fame. It's that same goodness that you would expect, but now optimized for your mobile device. Whether you've played Octopath before or are totally new to the series, I'm sure this one is for you. Don't forget to download and check out Champions of the Continent now with the link in the description to claim all of this. It's free and just recently dropped on the App Store and Google Play Store, so you could be one of the first to get your hands on it. Now on to, I don't know, probably the most controversial allegation in Nintendo history. To say Donkey Kong saved Nintendo is like saying you should be subscribed to Siiroth. It's just a given. Arcades were the birthplace of the video game boom in the early 80s, and before Nintendo made Donkey Kong, they were still a much smaller company that made toys and cards. This blockbuster game would be huge for them. They needed it so much that they may have been willing to steal it. In a stark contrast to what would happen with the Yoshi situation, get it? Stark contrast? Bro, I'm so good. Nintendo didn't develop their own games at this time. They were too small. But Miyamoto had an idea for how they were going to get into this new industry. He gave the idea for Donkey Kong to the development studio Ikegame, and they were paid to convert machines with the game Radar Scope on them to be able to play Donkey Kong, with only about 2,000 being made. And the game would go on to be a massive hit. Donkey Kong was significantly more popular than Radar Scope ever was. The idea was a success. So we obviously needed more copies to reach more people and make more money. It would be a win, win, and a win for everyone involved. But for one reason or another, be it Ikegame not being able to produce more fast enough or Nintendo not wanting to pay their fees, Nintendo began illegally making copies of the ROM of this game on their own, without the consent of the people who actually made it. Yeah. Nintendo was said to make about 80,000 copies this way, 10 times more than the 8,000 extras that they would later order from Ikegame. The thing was, Ikegame believed that they owned the rights to the code since, they kinda wrote it. It wasn't right for Nintendo to do this, but even though it was likely a crime, they didn't actually get into legal trouble at this time. Kinda ironic how Nintendo got away with this here, but many years later they would go after GameStop for doing the same thing with Xenoblade. But regardless, some time would pass, and because of the success of the original Donkey Kong and many other ideas that Miyamoto had to leave out due to time constraints, they wanted a sequel to be made. How would they change it up? Well, I don't know, how about you just take the bad guy from this game and make him the good guy? Well, Donkey Kong is kinda too big to do that, so let's just make a smaller version of him. No wonder there was so much trouble to get Ridley in Smash. This is how Donkey Kong Jr. was made, and even though he didn't meet the most pleasant of fates, this was still a good idea at the time. But the key to this was instead of handing over the development to Ikegame for them to just give back to Nintendo to later sell, Nintendo was making more money now. They were getting that bread. They figured, hey, why do we need this middleman? Let's just hire our own programmers and develop the game ourselves. Now, while this can seem really bad for Ikegame, and true, it would suck, from a purely business and money-making standpoint, the decision made sense for Nintendo. And since they owned the intellectual property to Donkey Kong, there was really nothing wrong with it. The crazy part though is Nintendo still managed to think, well, we have our own team now, and we're making this sequel, a game that's obviously going to be very close in design to the original because people liked it. Why do we even need to bother starting from scratch? Why not just reuse some of the code from the original without telling Ikegame? And surprise, surprise, that didn't go over too well. Nintendo hired a company called Iwasaki Giken to reverse engineer the Donkey Kong source code, with estimates today saying that about 66%, or just short of 2/3 of Donkey Kong Jr.'s code, is identical to the original. Crazy. And because of this, in 1983, Ikegami filed a lawsuit for 580 million yen, around 14 million US back then. They were mad. They may not have cared that much at the time about the 80,000 illegal copies that Nintendo produced of Donkey Kong, but after seeing what they did with Jr., they threw that into the lawsuit as well. Good for them. This was insane, and while there was so much at stake for both companies, who was in the right? Well, while it seems pretty freaking clear, Nintendo may have been saved by the time period they were in. Japan at the time didn't have any specifications in their copyright laws about computer code. Yeah, it's crazy to imagine today, but this shows just how new it all was at the time. And because nothing was explicitly written between Nintendo and Ikegami about who owned the code, not who wrote it, we all knew that, but who owned the code, things got more complicated than they probably should have been. Nintendo's clearly in the wrong here. They took this code, manufactured copies of it without permission, and then would develop a sequel that literally has 2/3 of it being exactly the same. I can't go buy a waifu pillow, alter the design slightly, and then mass produce it. And because of everything that went into it, the lawsuit lasted for 7 years. Nintendo's CEO at the time dismissed it by saying verbatim that if Donkey Kong wasn't nearly as successful in America as it was, Ikegami would have no issue. It was only done under the advice of lawyers. Or maybe they actually did have a case, as funnily enough in 1989, computer code was actually added into Japan's copyright law. And in 1990, the court ruled that Ikegami was really the owner of the code. Yeah. Nintendo may have owned the characters, gameplay, the idea behind it all, even the name Donkey Kong, but not the code, which was the key to all of this. So, was this it? Did Nintendo have to pay up after all of this? The short answer is yes, they actually did. But there's a bit more to it. The amount of money is unknown as Nintendo wanted to settle out of court. Knowing their position in the suit wasn't looking too good, the terrible optics of publicly admitting they stole one of their biggest games of all time, and Ikegami's desire to secure a large sum of money without having to roll the dice on the small chance of losing due to the company drastically shifting in direction a few years prior, this seemed like the perfect storm for both sides to keep quiet about it. A fortunate situation for Nintendo here being that they didn't have to care as much about paying that number by 1990 since they would have another big hit with Super Mario Bros. And the whole NES boom. The company was significantly bigger now than they were a decade prior. Nintendo didn't plead guilty, but they definitely weren't innocent either. But this wasn't even the craziest part. Watching this video today, you, like me, have probably not started playing this game in the early 80s arcades. We've played it on various re-released versions over the years, which Nintendo has had no issue with doing. They've released this game pretty much more than anything else, but after this whole debacle, how could they do it legally? This is still the same game, right? Well, the real reason for this is because for the NES release onwards, they wouldn't want to have to deal with this controversy any longer. Nintendo developed their own version of Donkey Kong from scratch. And for every single release of the game after this, we wouldn't be playing the arcade version, but actually an entirely different version programmed by the Big N. Well, except for 2 instances. Both in the Arcade Archives re-release of the game, and as a fun little cameo in Donkey Kong 64. Both of which were developed by other studios that simply asked Nintendo for permission instead of the decision being made internally. After the whole settlement though, I don't think Nintendo cared that much. Overall, it's just almost assuredly an effort to hide the allegations of them stealing this game from resurfacing in the future. They made their own version just for a little bit of extra security. Kinda unfortunate that I made this video then, huh? The big question though is, should Nintendo come forward with these allegations? Would it hurt them now in any way? Who knows, but with the way things have been going, I definitely don't think so. They probably still want to cover it up though, kinda like a popular Mario game that actually wasn't supposed to happen. You're gonna want to see this video examining the strange origins of Super Mario Galaxy 2, a story more tragic than you may think.